everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Atlantic Cell Podcast. I'm your host, Donald Campbell, and I'm here with one of my favorite people, Marisa Douglas, who started as an intern at the Cell. Actually, you were started before I was. Say hi, Marisa.
Hi. Yes, I did
Yeah,
start before you.
yeah,
I
go
started like
ahead.
right when you opened.
Yeah, right when we opened, because when I came, and this was 2017, I think,
I think so.
you were already there. So, I always like to start with people's origin stories. How did you get involved in this disability social work world? What drew you to it?
So this kind of how did this happen?
Wonder that too with me.
How did I get here? No. So this kind of how I got to like the sill essentially in 2000 maybe 2016. I think it might have all been the same
Yeah, it might have been all the
year.
same year.
I was taking a disability rights and history class at Stockton University, which is right up the street from the Sill, unless you guys moved offices, with professor there, Professor Lydia. I never learned how to say her last name. In fact, too, I do believe, though, may she rest in peace.
Yeah, Professor Lydia, who
Since
passed away. She was
passed
a board
away.
member and an awesome advocate and an awesome
Yes.
professor.
Yeah, she was an amazing professor. And I don't know, I just fell in love with advocacy because I never really knew about advocacy. I knew people advocated for things, right?
Right,
Like I knew
right.
the concept,
No, I know what you
but
mean.
like I never really knew about like people with disabilities advocating for themselves. Basically, like I knew like
I,
there's
I,
barriers, and I knew the world wasn't perfect, but I kind of had this idea of like, oh, the ADA just got written one day, and no, that's not what happened. Kind of learned about things like the 504 sit-ins and Capital Crawl, and eventually learned about these places called Centers for Independent Living.
yeah, yeah.
And then that summer, and like kind of just the concept of it being by people with disabilities, for people with disabilities, or and I fell in love with the concept coincidentally because that was this spring of 2016, and then that summer I get this email from, who was it? It was someone from Mental Health Association. I don't know exactly who put me in contact, but I got an email like, "Oh, one's opening right up the street, like, and we want to, know if you're interested in volunteering there." And I was like, "Absolutely, I think it was somebody from the Learning Access Program at
But
Stockton.
yeah, it
That's
might have been,
that's who it was.
if I remember, and this is a little
I
insider
haven't been
information.
a student at Stockton for a little bit, so we're getting the terms. Learning Access,
Yes,
if that's still the name of the office.
yes, yes, yes. And I remember you starting out and you were an intern, and I have a similar experience to you where we didn't really learn about disability advocacy in school. Like it wasn't really
Yeah.
covered. It was like the ADA, you would hear about the ADA, and then it was like, and then it happened, and then everyone was happy, and we all moved on with our lives. Like that's
Yeah. Here's a picture
basically,
of,
basically
the
the story.
first Bush senior
Yes.
signing it. There you go. Okay, so
Yeah, no,
moving
so
on.
that
Yeah. If we even got to the 88, because most of the times, like I
right.
think that was the aim of like my high school history classes to get to the modern era. And we never
Never
really
happened.
got there. We got to
Right. I would always
the
say that. We would
Cold
always get to
War.
like, maybe World War II.
Yeah, we got to like, yeah, if the most modern year, I feel like we got to like this tangent, but like got the Cold War, and then yeah.
And it ended. But
Yeah.
yeah, so and it's cells are unique in that they're run by people with disabilities, and 51% of their staff and board have to have a disability. So did that
Yes.
draw you to it because of your disability? Was that like interesting to you? And you can talk about that whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, just the fact that of like, like because obviously, you know, when we, especially like growing up with a disability, because there's definitely disabilities that happen in adulthood, but like growing up with a disability, because I have spina bifida for the listeners who don't know me, I know you knew that, but which is, something you're born with, and kind of grow up like, oh, like, how will this affect my ability to get a job like later?
Right.
You know, those things you start thinking about as you're leaving high school. So like, we're leaving college. So it is definitely awesome to have places that like are with that kind of model of like for people with disabilities by people with disabilities,
Right.
because it does offer like, okay, like my boss is going to understand like my disability is doing something weird
Yeah, yes,
and
yeah,
might
yeah.
have to take a day off,
Yeah.
or
Yeah,
like,
I agree. And I think that for me, like I didn't see a lot of organizations, at least when I was younger, run by people with disabilities. So it was a lot of people,
yeah,
it was a
and
lot of
like,
people even giving me services that it's like, do you know what it's like to have a disability? And it's always it's like that's what's unique about cells. It's like a different mindset.
yeah, definitely having, because yeah, that can definitely be true. Like you look at other places who do great work, who are lovely, but also like, yeah, sometimes the service providers who are kind of like, I mean, you do you really know like what I'm going through?
Right, right,
Because
right.
sometimes with other services it can be like, okay. I know people, I don't know, like there is the question of like, do you see me as just like a case file?
Right, right. Like, are you like somebody to take care of and not somebody to work with, kind of? Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, so you worked at the cell, you did a lot of advocacy and you did a lot of
Yeah.
peer support after your internship. Talk about that, how you got involved with advocacy and because a lot of people come to us and they go, how do I they want to advocate, but they're scared. So
Yeah.
talk about,
It can be scary. Yeah. So, like I said, because the way I got introduced to Centers for Independent Living was through this class. And what was I say? Like through the stories of like people with disabilities throughout history, advocating and kind of setting up the first SIL in California, and the intention behind that, and trying to eliminate barriers that people with disabilities face. Like, so advocacy was always sort of like main part of what I wanted to do at the SIL. Starting from when I was an intern, like, all right, when are we gonna try to take on the bigger issues?
yeah,
Like, so it was also always something I had an interest in, and then eventually became something I got the opportunity to do during my internship I did there. I did advocacy group where got some people together and we worked on like different issues that the group found interesting
right.
that were going on at the time, and try
Yeah,
to
so
get projects.
what do you think are some of the barriers for people with disabilities and advocacy? Because it could be challenging to even advocate and like how do you deal with those barriers? Because I know like transportation is always an issue
Oh,
and
transportation.
and just the having a disability can be very exhausting in general, so adding extra things to your plate can be an issue. So kind of
Yeah.
talk about that.
So just those two things that you just mentioned are can definitely be big, big barriers. Especially if like, yeah, transportation. Definitely options that exist, but they can be imperfect, and yeah, trying to find those things, and trying to create sort of, I mean, in the spirit of Phil, trying to create the resources in a way, looking into what your community might offer. Yeah, definitely. With just like your disability being exhausting, and like add like you said, adding things more on top of your plate.
Yeah.
With that, it's sort of about knowing your limits, which is
Yes.
kind of goes into the role I fulfill now of teaching people about their limits of like, sometimes you do have to respect like, can't do I can do this and I can't do that, like focusing more on what you can do rather than what you can't do.
Yeah, I always
more
that's a
more
good
th-
point.
more thing, more type of thing. Yeah, and trying not to fulfill too much on your plate, because and playing more to your strengths, because what you might have a strength in, will be somebody else's weakness, and like their strengths might be your weaknesses. Trying to, that's why like doing it in a group can be good, rather than trying to do strictly solo stuff. Solo stuff is great too, but doing it in a group can be motivating. What do I want to say?
Yeah, it's just
Yeah,
important to have go ahead.
yeah. No, I was trying to get my thoughts. Like, yeah, just doing it in a group, because again, like that social aspect of it, that brings in like motivation and, like I said, playing off strengths and weaknesses of each other.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's really important and kind of knowing your limits and knowing what you're good at. And like you don't, not everybody has to advocate the same way. If you're good at social media, you can do that. If you're
Mm,
good at speaking, you can do that. If I mean, if you're a financial person, all these groups need help with that aspect, you can do that. If you're good at, you know, getting people together, you can do that. So even if
yeah,
you're more shy or more, you don't have to do everything kind of
yeah,
the stereotype advocacy tying yourself to a tree.
yeah.
Like
You
you
don't
don't
have to be the
have to do that.
you don't have to be the person out front if you're an introvert.
Yes. Yes, I think that makes people nervous. So then after the SIL, you got your master's, right? So talk about that. Talk about having a disability for your master's and that all in.
Yeah, so getting your master's with a disability is an interesting. I mean, getting your master's in general, interesting. But I was actually getting my master's when I was at the SIL, and then I completed it completed it towards the end of the SIL. So yes, I got my master's in social work. It was definitely, speaking of like knowing your limits and like balancing, things. Yeah, definitely like, and this can go kind of maybe into a little self advocacy or like I knew I had took an extended program because I knew like I can't do, because sometimes they try to get you to do like 5 classes a semester. Knew
Yeah,
that wasn't going to work for me.
yeah.
Had seen the results of that.
That
Not
sounds
good.
terrifying. I'm getting stressed out thinking about
You
it.
should. It's not good. So I took a bit of an extended one where I took like 2 classes, but then sometimes when I was doing like the internship, I had to take this, I call it half a class because we only had a couple assignments throughout the semester. It was related to the internship, but yeah, so kind of had to really find the balance of that of like, okay, well, especially talking about like transportation, well, I have to factor in like the workload and how many papers you have to write, especially in a social sciences class, and like getting to campus and all these different things. So
Yeah, there's a quote I
mm,
like that I saw online. It's like having a disability is like playing life on hard mode. So,
yeah,
and
no, it definitely is.
I agree with that because when I went to graduate school, it was you had to deal with the stress of graduate school, and then you had to figure out all the how am I going to write these papers? How am I going to do
Yeah,
this? It's
the
all
time
different.
and yeah, having to do an internship. Like, okay, I had to do that. I think it was 2 days a week at least, and sometimes I think it was three. Yeah, so figuring all that out, definitely can be a little bit hard mode.
Yes, it
But
can be, but and I would just say my advice too would be like figure out what works for you. Don't compare yourself to others because I think that can be
yes,
very mentally draining. Like if you just because somebody else is taking 5 classes doesn't mean you have to. If it takes you an
yeah,
extra year or two, who
yeah,
cares? Like it's not a
yeah,
race. It's not a
yeah.
race.
No, absolutely look into that because I'll say with social work because I can't speak of other
Yeah,
types of master's degree. I know some schools they don't offer extended programs. And if you're thinking like, oh, if I have to take 5 classes a semester, like that will cause me to probably not make it through the first semester and like drop out,
right,
maybe go to a different school.
right, yeah,
Maybe
right. Like
consider one with an extended program.
you're right. Like do your homework. Like know what you're getting into. Do your homework. Maybe try and find other people with disabilities who went through that. Like do
Yes,
some research
finding
because
support for that too.
you know.
Definitely. Or, yeah.
So yeah, it's and then after you graduated, then you left the cell. What are you up to nowadays? What are you up to
Then I
now?
left the cell. Most devastating day of my life.
Yes, it was devastating. We're still recovering all these years later.
You should be.
Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, like that was it's going on 4 years ago. So now I'm a licensed social worker because I got my license around the same time I left the cell. So now I'm working in the mental health field, being a licensed social worker, providing therapy for people until and then eventually I'll be a licensed clinical social worker, hopefully sooner rather than later.
That's so cool. It's so
Yeah,
cool. I'm learning as we go because
yeah,
I haven't talked to her. I mean, we've bbeen talking, but it's been a while since we caught up. So, what do you
yeah.
think? Because I really giving therapy is so important. And what do you think as a person with a disability? I feel like you really bring something that people don't usually get because, it's not, stereotypical, whatever they call normal. And
Mm.
so people with disabilities who are 25% of the population get therapists who understand anything about what they're going through. So just talk about that. Is you get to bring something unique to therapy that maybe people don't get.
Yeah, no. And that's kind of the whole reason I kind of went into being like a social worker and being a therapist. Initially, my goal when I majored in going all the way back to when I started at Stockton, like I mentioned earlier, I was in a psychology major and I was thinking like, okay, I'm going to go all the way with psychology and I'm going to become a doctor and work in a hospital setting, like specifically a children's hospital, because I
Right.
had grown up going, as disabilities might do, especially many people with spina bifida are listening. I don't know if any of you are, but if you are, you know how it is, you know, in and out of the hospital sometimes. Although I was, not too much, but definitely had my experiences. So those sorts of things that happen with that and just growing up with a disability in general. I mean, regardless of medical things it might put you through. If you perceive yourself as being different when you're like in that middle school, high school years, it's hard.
Yeah.
So, my own things that I've grew up with like a little bit of social anxiety, a little bit of depression, regular anxiety, generalized, we call it. So, like, definitely wanting to work with specifically people with disabilities. I mean, mental health conditions are considered disabilities in general, which is
Right.
sometimes a conversation people don't want to have.
No, they don't. They think we're all
Because
happy or something.
you know inter community conversations about like people with physical disabilities versus mental disabilities.
Yeah,
It's like,
and there's
why are we
always it's
fighting?
it's amazing how
You all have disabilities. This
yes.
is you know
We don't need to
um
fight about it.
it's like, no, I don't, but I don't use a mobility aid. It's like, that's not what disability means.
Yes.
Like, one version. But for people with like both going on, sometimes I guess physical and mental health conditions, like definitely offering like, because sometimes I'll tell clients if I know like they've listed like, depending on the place, sometimes they'll get a description of like, oh, they're dealing with health anxiety, they're dealing with like adjusting to these different physical
Right.
diagnoses that they've gotten. I'll tell people like, okay, because I'm very specific about it, because especially when we get into like chronic illness type of
Right.
community, heard stories of, especially, I mean, happens to probably all people with chronic illnesses, but I've heard it especially with women with chronic illnesses, just get told like, oh, it's hormones, which, maybe it is, but like it's depression, it's anxiety. And it's like, okay, but is it though? So I'm very, very, maybe sometimes too careful, but, and I mean, hopefully other therapists are also very careful, but specifically, I try to be very careful of like, all right, do you feel like your doctors are listening to you? Do you feel like your symptoms are being taken seriously? And like, yes, maybe you're developing depression and anxiety due to these health conditions and like the things you go through with that. But where do you think the line is between that's a physical symptom and that's a depression and anxiety symptom? Because they're
Right.
very different.
Yeah.
And like double checking with that, which,
Yeah, and I'm sure you meet people who, because we always talk about the disability that you can acquire a disability at any time, and I think it's
mm,
good for them to see people with disabilities and know that like your life is not over because it's like portrayed in the
oh yes,
media and like culturally sometimes it's like having a disability means it's the end. Like what it's like we get credit as people with disabilities for like just living our lives. Like
oh yeah, no, and absolutely the internalized ableism that comes up sometimes, especially people who have been like newly diagnosed with things, or sometimes when I've worked with like younger people, like teens or in their early 20s with disabilities who haven't fully like accepted themselves
right.
yet, of like, this is kind of life. Yeah, definitely working on
And it's okay, it's a cool
a lot of,
community.
yeah, a lot of those, a lot of that kind of stuff of like, you're not going to get where you want to go by telling yourself like, to I don't know.
Yeah, accepting. I know
By
what you're trying to say.
not accepting yourself and like fighting against
Acceptance is a
this.
big part of it. You need to
Oh yeah.
accept it, and it's different for everybody because disability comes in all shapes and forms. So,
Yes.
and I'm not trying to tell anybody who's in severe pain to like suck it up and be happy. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, not in a
Okay.
suck it up and be happy thing, but in a more like, again, talking about like knowing your limits.
Right, right.
Some people who don't want to accept that they now have limits or
Yes.
have ever had limits, they wind up making their symptoms worse because they just don't want to accept
Right. It's
their
like the
limits. And it's like, all right, you
right.
have to work on the acceptance part because either you're going to continue not respecting your body and what your body is telling you, or you're going to continue to stay in this mental space, and you're going to potentially make your physical symptoms worse, and you know
Or deny yourself resources because I don't have a
and denying.
disability, or all this type of stuff. It becomes like you said, that internalized ableism. And if you don't know what ableism is, it's just the belief that being non-disabled is better, essentially, and that's how our society was really built, and why disability rights is still, I always say, still a radical. Disability rights and justice still a radical concept. Even the idea that we should be the community and leaders and therapists and lawyers and is like still not as accepted as it should be. So, and
Yeah.
did you ever, what were some of your concerns when you started your next journey into therapy? Were there any barriers you faced just, with employment? And I don't want you to throw anyone into the bus, not like that, but like, what are some of the things you see that, challenges that people with disabilities face that other people may not think of, even to get in the door? Sometimes literally to get
Yeah,
in.
no, sometimes it is literally in the door. Because I mean, when I was looking for jobs starting out as a newly licensed LSW, one of the things that happens, or one of the things which is good, which is great that these services exist because they're so beneficial for clients. But a lot of places do hire for in the community type work,
Right.
intensive in community. Yeah, I think is the acronym there. And due to, like we talked about, like transportation and just the way like homes are built, only like I think the statistic is 5% of homes are like accessible.
I
Like
didn't know that
I'm
statistic. There you go. That's a good one.
yeah, no.
5%.
Yeah, I what do I want to say? Can't take those jobs.
Yes.
So because I can't go door to door because I don't know using a wheelchair, like, is how accessible is the entrance. Some obviously are very accessible, some are not. So like that was a concern. And then, you hear, in the social in the therapy world specifically, like, the caseload you're required to have, like that can be high. I've definitely experienced that. And like, how does this work with, needing to take a day off every once in a while? And then there's definitely, which shout out to my friends, they're always telling me to get over this. Like social worker, therapist guilt that comes in. And when you're having like a bad disability day and you're like, I need to take a day off, you have to practice what you preach a little bit
Yes.
and
True.
just take the day off, because if I'm not doing well, then I'm not going to be there for my clients, and it's going to be a whole
Right.
mess, and it's not going to be
Yeah. So
not going to be good.
just how has the virtual world opening up given people with disabilities opportunities you think that wouldn't otherwise be there? Or do you feel like we pulled a lot of that back after COVID? Where do you think we are?
I mean, because I mean, in general, if you're talking about in general, I mean, obviously, it very much did open a lot of things up. I mean, there were new events that were happening over Zoom, and more doctors were seeing people virtually, and teletherapy, absolutely blew up. I mean, so yeah, it definitely did make the world a lot more accessible, which was great. And I do see that like things are starting to revert back to how they were for 2020, which was kind of a shame.
Some of that too. That's why
And I'm always seeing like go like in the social work world. I mean, it's been fascinating because some places a lot of clients want to do teletherapy, but some places they want more in person. I don't know. It's always client preference. So, I mean, in that world specifically, I don't see teletherapy going away, although we do always hear like talking like systemic things, how they want to change like Medicaid specifically of like covering
Yes, yeah.
teleservices and always concerned about that and
And
contacting
this
my
is why,
representatives about it because
yeah, yeah, and
that's
this
my
why,
that's my clients. Something that that's my
yeah,
clients.
and this is why circling back to what we talked about in advocacy, Medicaid is important, and these issues are important because they affect people with disabilities. I've heard that too, a lot of talk about not covering telehealth, and and I
Yeah,
understand why people want things in person if that's what you want, but there should be option. I always go, accommodations are about options. So
yeah. No, there
you
should be
have,
the option to have
yeah,
in person. I mean, I know some therapists that prefer just as therapists, like as the worker,
right.
prefer to do telemedicine, and that's their prerogative. But yeah, definitely like, having the option, but just taking away the option to do for clients telesessions is not great because
Yeah, it's
yeah,
it's not it's very counterproductive because then you end up with people getting less care and then they get other issues and then that actually turns into more expensive because they're gonna
yeah,
get the
yeah.
issues that are gonna need care. So it's not very I always laugh when people say it'll save money or whatever, but you'll just end
Well,
up paying for
no,
it.
it saves money in the short term.
Yeah, yes,
That's the thing always with insurance is that they want to save money in the short term, and it's like no long term because especially like we talk about like transportation, like okay, even if that's like a main barrier for someone, which it's a huge barrier for people with disabilities. It's before you get into like energy levels of specific
right,
conditions, but like if you look at it from okay, someone with maybe a physical disability has trouble leaving the house with transportation and you take telemedicine away from them, okay, well now they wind up in a mental health crisis. What's going to cost less to have a session a week with a therapist, telemedicine, or a week, a month, however long they might wind up needing in an inpatient facility?
yeah,
What's cost less here?
even fiscally, it doesn't make sense. And you brought up transportation, and I know that's something you were very passionate about because
Oh, I'm
you,
still passionate
you
about
were
it.
you would get to the cell with no transportation. You would always make it work, and there are options out there, and in New Jersey there's paratransit. We call it Access Link, who we do really appreciate for the work that they do. But talk about the barriers that do exist transportation for people with disabilities. But the
Yeah.
barriers. So what was your experience?
So I still take Access Link because cars are expensive.
Yes, they are. That's true.
Yeah. So Access Link, we love and appreciate them. Drivers are awesome. I haven't really had
People are
drivers are
people.
yeah, they're great. Oh, really? But yeah, like sometimes, you take Access Link and it winds up taking like the sill. So
Right.
for example, like getting like the sill to just drive if I just had a car, you know, from my house to there is 50 minutes. I don't even think it's really an hour to take Access Link. Some days it would be like, and this is still, more than a car, but like I want to say like the shortest it would be like an hour and a half
Yep.
because it's across two different counties, so you had to go into the county in which the still is in. And I had to change buses and then go the rest of the way. So it's at least like one and a half times the length that it actually takes. Sometimes it would be 4 hours. So the time and just not being able to get places as efficiently as as if you had a car, and then some people or some places do wind up being in outside of their service area, so they only go within a certain distance. I think it's still 3/4 of a mile, but yeah, that distance from a bus stop, like a regular NJ Transit bus stop. So some places you'll call up and you'll call the reservation line, or you'll try to use the Access Link online thing, and they'll have to tell you like, hey, we don't actually go there, which that's always disappointing. So you have to try to go, either you just forget it or you try to have to like, try to arrange some
Strategically
other,
figure it out.
yeah, strategically figure it out. Like, I mean, like, I don't know, I'm somewhat fortunate because if I can go so far on Access Link, I am able to transfer into a car, so I can take an Uber to the rest of the way. But that gets expensive. And then even options like Uber, like they have wheelchair accessible vehicles in major cities.
Right.
I don't live in a major city.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And
yeah.
even Atlantic City isn't a major city.
Right.
So
It's
like,
amazing. People with disabilities live all over. We don't just all live in one
yeah.
spot.
If only we all only lived in like New York. Because then
Yes,
maybe,
yes. Yeah, I just
take
think
it
what
over.
you said is so true. Like you said, that's why working with Access Link to expand drivers and expand options. I know they've looked into connecting with rideshare, and because it's really important because people
Yeah.
with disabilities, paratransit exists nationwide, but one of the
Yes.
biggest challenges is that it can take a long time to get to where you need to go. When you're trying to work and go to doctor's appointments and live life, like
Yeah.
it's hard. That's a hard thing
Yeah.
to manage. Like you used to leave the house like super early just to get to work on time.
Oh yeah, yeah. So my agreed upon hours, I think again with kind of going
Yeah.
back to like the original, one of the original questions of like why work at a sill, hour accommodations, lovely.
Yes,
Which is kind of the
I've been
benefit
told.
too of being a therapist now because I can I'll do sessions
Right.
forever. Like yeah, I would leave my house like sometimes 8 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes I'd be the first one in the office, and everybody would be like, "Where'd you
Yeah,
go
I
yet
know
already?"
that's true.
And I'm like, "Well, I was lucky today." And then sometimes I'm coming in and they're like, "It's 1 p.m. in the afternoon," and I'm like, "Yeah, it was like 5 hours somehow. I don't know what they did. They went backwards."
Yes, yes.
Um,
It
sometimes they
was
do that.
sometimes it was never entirely clear what happened. It was just like what happened happened. And
Yeah.
and I think what you said was such a good point that, when you're looking for a job, and I'm not saying this is fair, because I always say we gotta accept the world as it is as we're trying to change it. Like think about your job and what you're applying for, and will they be accommodating if I have to take Access Link? Um,
Yeah, and like what's reasonable and
yes, yes.
yeah.
And what would you tell? Because what would you tell somebody who is just starting to navigate paratransit? What would be your tips of like how to survive? Because some people can be very intimidated by it, but I always think of you, and I always think that like I don't know, Marissa had it down pretty well to a science. So what
Yeah,
would you
so
tell?
a large part of it, because I do when I'm on the bus, I do meet some people who's like it's their first time on the trip.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, here's what you have to do. Kind of have to accept because again, the drivers are awesome. And you did mention a couple sentences ago state funding for
Right.
paratransit and how that, plays into how many drivers they have and how many buses they have. Certainly, if we could just give them an infinite budget, that would be great.
Yeah.
But infinite money doesn't exist as a concept. But so kind of to an extent, again, with those like acceptance things, you kind of have to accept the situation to an extent of like, okay, so it usually takes 20 minutes to get to my doctor's, like if that's the trip. And you kind of have to learn, like, yeah, it might take 20 minutes if you were driving or if, one of your family members was driving you or a friend. However, since it is a shared ride, you do have to understand, like, that 20 minutes now can become, because they also, like, because it's curb to curb of, pick you up at your house and drop you off, like, where you're going. They do also have to wait for 5 minutes if you're not already like ready to go. So you have to kind of add in like those times. and kind of accepting like, okay, I have to schedule more time to get there. Like I always give myself like sometimes way too much time to get there. Like you don't think you're gonna, you don't think it's necessarily going to take an hour, but what if it does one day?
Right. You like
That's
having
gonna
that
be
cushion.
it's gonna be the day you don't give yourself enough time that
Right.
it's gonna be the bad day. So like
Yeah,
that, and
you were
also
always good at you were always good at that. I don't remember you ever being late actually, because
well,
you were always. I don't really remember. I'm sure it happened once or twice because of access link, but you were always good at like giving yourself like if you had to be there by 1, you would like come in at 11 because you knew like I can't I can't cut it close in terms of I gotta assume that access link is gonna be late. I gotta assume if they're not, that's great.
yeah, I gotta kind of, even though this kind of maybe isn't the best for my anxiety people, but
Yes,
it
I
is
know.
sort of, you do have to sort of plan for the worst when it comes to paratransit a little bit,
Yes,
and hope for the best. Always hope
yes.
for the best. Because like again, like average access link from like my house to the sill would take an hour and a half. Okay, so I
Right.
could you know get a ride at like 9 o'clock and probably be in there by 11, but you know it could wind up being the 4 hour day.
I could.
you know Rare did those 4 hours days happen, but they did happen. So planning for it, yeah, and just kind of more understanding like it's a shared ride. It's not going to be like,
It's,
if you
it's
are someone who takes Uber ever, like even that can be a shared ride depending on which version you
right,
take.
exactly.
um but like understanding, especially like a bus, and especially if you're going like a distance, it's a shared space. You have to
Yes.
learn how to like bring, like if you don't like noisy people sometimes, because
Headphones.
yeah, you have to bring your headphones or something to do kind of one bus, and sort of again those acceptance things of
You gotta
like,
kind of embrace it. Believe me, and if me and
yeah,
Marisa were in charge, we'd make a lot of changes and get funding and more drivers and a lot of things. But I think the people who do the best at it are people who, like you, who accept it for what it is and
yeah,
just kind of work around it. Because I like what you said too. It's accepted for what it is. It's a shared resource. Like it's like a trade-off. Like for that, and I'm not saying this is how it should be, but for that reduced cost, an Uber.
yeah. No, I mean, they're, yeah, like trade-off is a great way to put it, because like, I'm not saying that like, oh, it should just stay the way it is, because
Mhm.
definitely there should be changes. Like,
Right,
should the drivers be paid more? Absolutely.
right.
Should we try to hire more and like,
Absolutely. So we have more
and
buses,
maybe
all that
change some
good
things to
stuff.
encourage them to stay?
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, and get new buses and more buses and things, and just put more into it. Absolutely. But also it's always going to be public transportation.
Yeah. Right, right.
That's just
And
sort of how it
and
is.
like to deny yourself services or opportunities, like you really got to think about like if you're gonna wait for Access Link to be perfect, you're gonna be waiting for a long time.
Yes.
And
Like they
and
yeah.
Lyft and Uber are expensive. So, it's a
Yes,
trade-off.
very.
It's a trade-off. So,
It is, yeah, it's definitely a trade-off. I mean, to their credit, to the state's credit, I mean, it hasn't improved since I started taking it.
yeah, remember
Absolutely.
I
They
remember you
finally
told
take
me that.
debit cards,
Yeah.
card payments. I loved when that happened.
And
So much easier.
that's a good advocacy opportunity too, taking it back to the beginning. Like
Yeah.
these services need to hear from people and like they don't need to hear from people who've never ridden Access like before. They need to hear from people.
Yeah, no, exactly. You can't complain about paratransit, since just we're on that topic. Like, if you've never been on paratransit, like, I mean, again, there are, especially with the way it works in Jersey and probably the other states. I think from what I have some friends in other states, and do think Jersey is one of the best
Oh, really?
with
That's good to know.
paratransit. But like, yeah, like I said, kind of can't complain about something you've never taken. And I mean, if you are taking Access Link, they do offer, like, it's every few months, I think. I don't know how often they do it exactly, but they offer like forums, they call them, for customers to come and talk to them of like, hey, what do you want to be changed?
Right. Right. And it could be a little thing, and like you said, little things like being able to use your card. And when you first started, you used to have to pay with like exact change.
Yeah, you have
And
to pay with cash. Nobody has cash. This is a cashless society at this point, which is,
right.
we can debate that, but like, yeah, paying
It's
with
the
a debit
reality
card,
though. Nobody's walking around with exact change.
being able to just throw $20 on your account, or you have to put at least 25. Being able to just throw $25 on your account, awesome, awesome
It's one
improvement.
it's
I
one
can't.
less stress. One less
uh,
stress you have to think about.
Absolutely.
All right, well, that's been great, Marissa. It's been great catching up. And I just want anything you would say to anybody in closing. You don't have to, but if they're kind of like Marissa the intern was, and was like, what am I gonna do? And I'm in school. What am I gonna do? What would you say? Like, how would you get involved in this disability world space? What would you tell them?
Yeah. I mean, like, if you're a college student, like, definitely trying to go to whatever your school's version of disability services is. Like I know Stockton, it's called Learning Access Program. If you're a Stockton student, listen to this, please go there,
Yes.
because it was definitely something that like me and my friends were telling people about who were kind of in denial that they need services, and we're kind of like, no, go there. We're going to take you. We're going with you. So definitely go there, because um, you know, I mean, they work with students with disabilities. So, if you're wanting to start like a support group possibly or something, like, they might have resources to help with that. Cause I definitely know, like, in college, it can feel lonely if you don't have your group, especially freshman year when you don't
Oh
necessarily have your
yeah.
group settled, or you're trying to
You
find
feel
them.
like everybody's got friends and which is not
Oh,
true,
yeah.
but that's how you can feel.
Yeah, no, that was sort of my first semester experience. I was like,
Yes.
everybody already has friends, but it just took me a semester to find them. And now
Right.
we're friends like 12 years later. So, yeah, just using the resources on campus, trying to find your people, starting resources if there aren't really any, like, especially, like I said, like support groups, because, like I said, it can feel lonely. And if it's lonely for you, it's lonely for at least one other
Yes,
person.
you're not.
You're
I
not the
tell
only
people,
person with a disability.
yeah, I always tell people like you're not breaking new ground with your disability. Like a lot of like there's a lot of great resources out there, and don't like what you talked about taking people to the disability services
Oh,
office.
yeah.
Like,
No,
don't make life hard on yourself, and don't deny yourself opportunities.
yeah, some do that. And
Yes,
yeah,
just
just kind of, yeah. And you kind of said like finding your way in like the disability advocacy world, like find, I don't know, your niche,
yeah, yes,
like what you're actually interested in, because you can't be interested. Maybe you can be interested in everything, but there might be things that you're specifically very passionate about, like, I don't know, like your specific disability and like,
right,
that
yes,
community, or like a woman with a disability. So a lot of women with disability issues
right.
has informed mine, or the, you know, different,
LGBT issues with this. Like, there's a
yeah,
house disability. There's a lot of like you don't have to solve all of disability. Like,
yeah.
take a
Let's
breath.
not, with especially that, yeah, conversation with like knowing your limits. You cannot solve every single disability issue yourself. Might have interest in all of them, and you might be able to help with different things, but yeah, finding what you actually kind of care about
Yeah, I would also say
is,
to to people like put yourself out there a little bit. I know it's hard, especially if you
mm,
have anxiety and you're shy. I'm actually more introverted myself. I know that shocks a lot of people, but I actually am. But like people are gonna me and Marissa got our jobs in our way by just kind of showing up in rooms. And
mm,
and if you show up in rooms long enough, you
mm,
meet people and they put you to work. So
yeah, just
so just have I
kind
would
of,
a lot of life is showing up, so just keep showing up.
yeah, no, basically just show up with your disability and be like,
What can
yeah,
I do
here
to
I am.
what can I do to help? So
Just,
and all issues are disability issues. So if there's some
yes.
organization working on transportation or homelessness or gun violence or police brutality or anything, all those issues, or environmental issues, and you're like, well, that doesn't have anything to do with disabilities. It has
No,
everything to do with disabilities.
everything.
And you belong. And if you're like, well, nobody with the disability is there making decisions or
Yes, they
involved.
are.
That's exactly why you should be.
Yes, that's exactly why you should be there.
Yeah.
And secondly, invisible disabilities exist, so
Yes,
they probably
exactly.
are. Count 4 people, one of them has a disability.
Exactly. Exactly. We used to, and that's just stigma. I mean, you run into people who are walking around with canes and walkers saying they don't have disabilities. So
Oh yeah, those conversations.
yes, yes. So just put yourself out there. You belong in this world too, and you can make a difference in your small way. So don't be
Yes.
afraid of trying new things. So thank you so much,
Mhm.
Marissa, for stopping by. It was great catching up with you. And
Of course, it's great catching up with you too.
all right, everybody. Well, thank you, and I will see you next time with another guest. Maybe as cool as Marissa. It might be hard for them, but definitely not more
Big
cool.
shoes to fill.
Yeah, they might meet the level,
Tough,
but definitely not over
tough,
Marissa. So thanks,
tough act to
everybody.
follow. I hope.
Yeah, yeah, thank you, everybody, and see you next time. Bye.
Mm.